February 1st, 2025 was supposed to be just another big NBA night. Lakers, Knicks, prime time, bright lights inside Madison Square Garden. But before the opening tip even went up, something happened that quietly shifted the balance of power in professional basketball media, and almost no one saw it coming. Because when NBC Sports launched Basketball Night in America that evening, the camera didn't pan to a retired Hall of Famer. It didn't settle on a long-time NBA analyst. Sitting in that chair was a 23-year-old active player, Caitlin Clark. Not as a guest appearance tucked into the final segment, not as a promotional cameo, but placed front and center in prime time. And in that moment, the usual boundaries between leagues, platforms, and power structures felt thinner than ever. This wasn't random scheduling. This wasn't filler content before a major matchup. This was Lakers versus Knicks, one of the most watched regular season matchups possible, broadcast from the most iconic arena in basketball. The stage couldn't have been bigger, and that's exactly what made it different. Because when a network gives an active WNBA player that kind of platform during an NBA showcase, it isn't experimenting, it's sending a message. At first, the reaction online felt like curiosity. Fans were asking simple questions. Is she ready? Why her? What does this mean? But within minutes of her speaking, the tone shifted. She wasn't hesitant. She wasn't cautious. She didn't sound like someone trying to protect her image. She broke down spacing, rotations, timing, adjustments, explaining the game in a way that felt natural, sharp, and controlled. Not rehearsed, not forced. And that's when something subtle but undeniable happened. People leaned in. The other analysts seemed slightly surprised, not dramatically, not visibly shaken, but there was a pause, the kind of pause that happens when someone exceeds expectations in real time. She guided the conversation instead of following it. She anticipated questions before they were fully formed. She corrected small assumptions without creating tension. It wasn't flashy, it was composed, and somehow that made it even louder. For years, the conversation around the WNBA has centered on collective growth, league-first messaging, equal spotlight, shared visibility. That philosophy has shaped its marketing, its media strategy, and its identity. But on that February night, sitting in an NBA broadcast chair, one player stood out in a way that didn't feel engineered. It felt organic. And organic attention is the one thing no league office can fully control. That's why this moment mattered more than most people realized at first. There was no scandal, no argument, no heated debate on air, just competence under the brightest lights in basketball. And sometimes that's the most disruptive thing of all, because when someone performs at that level in a space traditionally reserved for another league, the conversation shifts whether anyone is ready for it or not. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was defining. That night wasn't just about analysis before Lakers versus Knicks. It became the night the balance quietly began to change, and what followed would make it impossible to ignore. What made this moment even more explosive wasn't just who was in the chair, it was when and where it happened. NBC Sports didn't ease Caitlin Clark into a quiet pregame slot on a low-stakes broadcast. They placed her at the center of a relaunch, Lakers versus Knicks. Sunday primetime, millions watching. That's not a test run, that's a bet. Networks don't gamble blindly, especially not when they're rebooting a national basketball package. Advertising dollars are locked in. Ratings expectations are projected months in advance. Every segment is planned to minimize risk. So when NBC chose a 23-year-old active WNBA guard to help carry that launch, it wasn't charity, it wasn't symbolism, it was strategy. And strategy in television always follows one thing: projected return. Think about the optics. Madison Square Garden glowing under national lights, the NBA's biggest brands on the court, and sitting alongside established analysts was someone still actively playing professional basketball in another league. There are layers to that decision. It signals confidence. It signals calculation. It signals that executives saw numbers, trends, engagement curves, and believed she could hold that stage without hesitation. And here's what's important. She wasn't there to promote a sneaker line. She wasn't plugging a documentary. She didn't introduce as a feel-good crossover story. The framing was clear. She was there because she could talk the game at the highest level. That distinction matters because the difference between a feature and a fixture is enormous. One is temporary, the other is investment. Behind every broadcast decision like that, there are meetings, conversations about optics, discussions about backlash, questions about whether audiences would accept it or reject it. Primetime NBA broadcasts are protective ecosystems. They are built around credibility. And if someone falters in that chair, even slightly, social media doesn't forgive it. The risk wasn't small, it was very real. But NBC made the move anyway. They didn't soften expectations either. They let her break down complex sets, defensive rotations, coaching adjustments, and they let it breathe. No hand-holding, no oversimplifying. That alone tells you something, because networks don't hand primetime control to someone they're unsure about. They protect launches at all costs. What makes the gamble fascinating is this. If it failed, it would have been obvious immediately. Viewers tune out fast. Engagement drops in seconds. Clips don't travel. But NBC must have believed the upside far outweighed the downside. They weren't protecting the status quo. They were leaning into momentum. And when a legacy network leans into momentum, it usually means one thing. They think something bigger is forming. The real story didn't unfold during the broadcast. It exploded after. Within hours of the segment airing, the numbers started circulating. Viewership didn't just hold steady, it jumped. Engagement during her analysis window spiked, higher than projected averages for comparable pregame segments. Clips of Caitlin Clark breaking down offensive spacing and late-game adjustments began moving across social platforms faster than some of the actual game highlights. That's when executives and critics started paying closer attention. This wasn't just WNBA fans rallying around one of their biggest names. Something different was happening. NBA-only accounts were reposting her breakdowns. Basketball strategy pages dissected her comments. Casual fans who rarely discussed the WNBA were sharing clips simply because the analysis felt sharp and easy to understand. When crossover engagement happens organically like that, it tells a very specific story. The appeal isn't confined to one audience. And that's the part that made it impossible to dismiss as hype. Because if attention had stayed flat, the narrative would have been simple. Nice experiment, solid performance, move on. But the surge forced a deeper conversation. Her segment reportedly outperformed typical pregame benchmarks in key demo pockets. Digital traffic around basketball in America rose noticeably. It didn't look like a novelty bump, it looked like momentum. In modern sports media, numbers don't whisper, they expose patterns quickly. Networks track minute-by-minute retention, they monitor social velocity, they evaluate replay value, and what they saw wasn't short-lived curiosity, it was sustained interest. Viewers stayed, they shared, they commented, and the comment sections weren't mocking or skeptical, they were impressed. That type of reaction shifts internal projections fast, because once executives see measurable lift attached to a personality, decisions start accelerating. Follow-up bookings move from "we'll see" to "lock it in." Marketing angles shift, promotional graphics get updated, momentum becomes strategy. And the fact that NBC quickly confirmed her second appearance for late March made one thing clear: the surge wasn't being ignored. What happened that night wasn't subtle. It was visible in data dashboards and trending charts. And once attention proves transferable across leagues, the old boundaries don't hold the same weight. The real question wasn't whether she performed well. That was obvious. The question became much bigger. What happens when one player's presence moves numbers in ways the industry can measure and replicate?
Here's where the story gets more complicated, and to be clear, much of this is based on industry chatter, not official statements. But when numbers move the way they did, conversations happen. And according to reports and insiders discussing the situation, those conversations weren't all celebratory. There's been growing buzz that some within the WNBA are quietly wrestling with what this moment represents, not publicly, not in press conferences, but behind closed doors. Because while no one is questioning Caitlin Clark's qualifications or performance, her rapid crossover into primetime NBA media touches on something deeper: control of narrative.
For years, the league's messaging has emphasized collective elevation, the idea that growth happens when the entire league rises together, that no single player should overshadow the product itself. And to be fair, that philosophy has historical reasons. Balance can protect long-term stability. But mainstream sports media doesn't operate on balance. It operates on gravity, and stars create gravity. Rumors suggest that some players have privately questioned whether this level of attention risks tilting coverage too far in one direction, not out of resentment, at least not publicly, but out of concern over how spotlight distribution evolves from here. Because once media companies realize a particular name consistently drives measurable interest, it becomes harder to rotate evenly out of principle alone. And that's where the tension reportedly sits. It's not about competence. She proved that. It's not about deserving opportunity. That argument doesn't hold. The speculation centers on what happens next. Does the league lean into star-driven acceleration, or does it attempt to rebalance messaging to preserve its collective first identity? Sources and media analysts discussing the situation suggest there are real philosophical questions unfolding internally. If one player continues breaking viewership patterns on broadcasts, on social platforms, across crossover spaces, can that success truly be framed as purely individual? Or does it inevitably reshape how the league markets itself moving forward? And here's the uncomfortable layer no one says out loud. When attention concentrates, power follows. Media leverage grows. Sponsorship pull expands. Negotiating positions strengthen. That shift can subtly alter locker room dynamics, endorsement hierarchies, even broadcast partnerships. Again, none of this has been officially confirmed by the league, but the online reaction, the commentary from former players, the debates across sports talk shows, they suggest something is brewing beneath the surface. Because moments like February 1st don't just trend, they ripple. And when a ripple moves fast enough, eventually it forces everyone watching to decide which direction they're willing to swim. The bigger story here isn't just about one player or even one league. It's about a structural shift in how sports media works, and that shift stretches far beyond the WNBA. What happened that night wasn't simply a successful guest appearance. It challenged the traditional pathway of who gets to sit in the authority seat when the NBA spotlight turns on. For decades, the formula has been predictable. Retired NBA veterans transition into studio roles. Former champions become analysts. The desk is usually reserved for those who built their resume within the NBA itself. But when NBC Sports placed Caitlin Clark in prime-time NBA coverage, that formula quietly cracked. She wasn't framed as the WNBA voice. She wasn't there for symbolic crossover representation. She was simply treated as a basketball analyst. That framing alone signals something bigger than a one-night booking. Authority in sports media has long been tied to league identity, but that night suggested authority can also be tied purely to skill, to knowledge, clarity, and command of the game itself. When audiences respond to analysis without questioning its origin, it reshapes assumptions about who belongs in those spaces. And once that perception shifts publicly, networks begin recalculating behind the scenes. This moment also highlights a deeper media trend. Broadcasters are searching aggressively for personalities who can bridge audiences. The divide between hardcore fans and casual viewers grows wider every season. Analysts often lean too technical or too simplified. Finding someone who balances both is rare. When that balance appears, and when it holds viewer retention, executives notice immediately. because in a ratings-driven business, clarity equals currency. What makes this shift even more powerful is that it expands the talent pipeline instantly. If active WNBA players can analyze NBA games credibly in prime time, the traditional gatekeeping model softens. That doesn't mean retired NBA legends disappear, but it does mean exclusivity weakens. The booth becomes more about performance than pedigree, and that changes long-term leverage. When an active player begins building broadcast credibility before their playing career even ends, their brand multiplies, endorsements extend, media opportunities diversify, post-retirement paths open earlier. Instead of waiting to transition years down the line, the crossover can happen in real time. That hybrid identity, athlete and media authority simultaneously, is powerful, and if it proves sustainable, other players will follow. From a network perspective, cross-lead integration reduces risk. When audiences overlap, engagement compounds. NBA fans who connect with a WNBA star through analysis may develop new viewing habits. Familiarity builds faster through explanation than through highlight reels alone. Analysis creates trust. Trust creates loyalty.
So while surface discussions focus on spotlight distribution, the deeper shift is structural. Basketball media may be moving toward a model where authority is portable, not confined to one league's badge. And if that proves true, February 1st won't just be remembered as a strong debut. It will be remembered as the moment the hierarchy started to evolve. Here's the part most leagues don't say out loud, but every executive understands. Modern sports don't grow because of balance, they grow because of stars. Across every era and every league, attention has always centered around individuals first. Fans don't wake up thinking about broadcast structures or collective philosophies. They follow personalities. They attach themselves to stories. They invest emotionally in faces, not frameworks. That pattern isn't new, it's just amplified now by social media and real-time analytics. The uncomfortable truth is simple. Star power accelerates growth faster than evenly distributed exposure ever has. One magnetic figure can pull casual viewers into an ecosystem that dozens of coordinated marketing campaigns struggle to penetrate. When that happens, it doesn't minimize the contributions of others, but it does concentrate attention, and concentrated attention is powerful. In today's media climate, numbers speak instantly. Engagement charts update in minutes. Minute-by-minute retention shows exactly when viewers lean in or tune out. Networks don't operate on philosophical ideals, they operate on measurable return. If one personality repeatedly increases viewership spikes, boosts digital interaction, and expands demographic reach, the system naturally adjusts around that signal. This isn't a critique of collective growth, it's an observation about how modern consumption works. Audiences scroll rapidly, they skip content without hesitation. The only thing that cuts through noise consistently is identifiable star energy. Not corporate messaging, not evenly balanced branding. Recognition drives clicks. Clicks drive revenue. Revenue drives expansion. And every major sport reflects that reality. Basketball didn't globalize through committee promotion. It expanded behind the gravity of individuals who captured imagination first. Leagues may prefer shared elevation, but mainstream media ecosystems react to momentum. And momentum tends to attach itself to names. That's what makes moments like February 1st so revealing. It wasn't a marketing campaign engineered for symmetry. It was a performance that drew organic response. When organic response turns into measurable growth, it forces recalibration, quietly, strategically. Because here's the dynamic no league can fully suppress. When one figure consistently opens doors, negotiates leverage shifts, and proves cross-platform viability, that influence changes internal power structures whether anyone plans for it or not. Not through confrontation, not through public statements, through attention alone. Modern sports rewards gravity,
and gravity pulls everything else into orbit around it. The question isn't whether leagues prefer that reality. The question is how they adapt once it becomes undeniable. So what does this actually mean moving forward? If February 1st was proof of concept, then the future becomes less theoretical and more strategic. Because once a network sees measurable return from a crossover presence, it doesn't quietly move on, it builds. NBC Sports already scheduling another appearance wasn't just a continuation, it was confirmation. That signals intent. The immediate implication is simple. More opportunities will likely follow, not just for Caitlin Clark, but potentially for other players within the WNBA who can command attention beyond their own season. If networks begin identifying crossover-ready talent early, the pipeline expands. That changes how players build personal brands. It changes how agents negotiate contracts. It even changes how media training is approached within the league itself. But the ripple effect runs deeper. If mainstream NBA broadcasts regularly include WNBA voices, not as special features but as integrated analysts, audience habits will shift. Familiarity grows. Cross-league conversations become normal. The psychological separation between the NBA and WNBA begins to shrink. That kind of exposure accelerates brand equity faster than isolated promotional pushes ever could. There's also a competitive element here. Once one major broadcaster demonstrates that crossover integration increases engagement, rival networks pay attention. They experiment. They adjust. Sports media is intensely competitive. If something works, it spreads quickly. And if that spread happens, the entire basketball coverage ecosystem evolves. For the WNBA specifically, this moment presents a strategic fork in the road. The league can double down on collective messaging while quietly leveraging star momentum, or it can publicly embrace a more star-forward model. Neither approach is simple, both carry risk. But ignoring the measurable impact of individual draw would be difficult after a moment this visible. Another long-term factor is bargaining power. When a player demonstrates cross-platform value in prime time, endorsement leverage expands, negotiations shift, visibility becomes an asset that extends beyond game performance. That doesn't just benefit one player, it raises the perceived ceiling for others. And perhaps the biggest change lies in perception. If active WNBA players are viewed as authoritative basketball voices in NBA coverage, it reframes the league's positioning in subtle but powerful ways. It challenges outdated assumptions about hierarchy. It accelerates legitimacy in spaces that historically felt separate. Of course, none of this guarantees permanence. Momentum has to be sustained. Appearances must continue delivering. Audiences must keep responding. But the door is open now. And in media, once a door proves profitable, it rarely closes voluntarily. The future doesn't hinge on one broadcast. It hinges on whether that broadcast becomes a pattern. Some moments fade after the headlines cool down. This wasn't one of them. February 1st didn't explode because of controversy. It didn't trend because of drama. It trended because competence met opportunity under the brightest lights in basketball and delivered. And that combination is harder to dismiss than hype ever could be. Once viewers see proof that something works, they don't unsee it. Caitlin Clark didn't step into that chair as a symbol. She stepped in as a voice. And when audiences responded in measurable, undeniable ways, the conversation shifted from "should this be happening" to "what happens next?" That shift is permanent, because data changes strategy. Strategy reshapes structure. For the WNBA specifically, this moment sits at an inflection point, not because one player succeeded, but because that success challenged long-standing assumptions about how growth must look. Collective elevation remains powerful, but star-driven acceleration just proved its case in prime time. And once both realities coexist publicly, the league's messaging can't remain static. For networks like NBC Sports, the takeaway is even clearer. Audiences reward clarity, they reward confidence, they reward authenticity. League boundaries matter less than compelling personalities who can hold attention. If that formula continues to produce results, future decisions will reflect it. The broader basketball ecosystem also absorbed a lesson. Authority is becoming portable. Credibility isn't confined to one badge, one resume path, or one broadcast tradition. When performance speaks loudly enough, structure adjusts around it. That's why this can't simply be undone. You can't reverse measurable engagement. You can't erase viewership spikes. You can't pretend a crossover moment never resonated. The only direction after that kind of proof is forward, whether slowly and cautiously or boldly and strategically. And here's the real reason this felt bigger than a pregame segment. It exposed a truth that modern sports media runs on attention gravity. Where it flows, opportunity follows. Where opportunity proves successful, investment deepens. And once that cycle begins, it accelerates. February 1st wasn't just another broadcast. It was the moment the old balance shifted, and everyone watching knew it.